Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this UKLFI Charitable Trust webinar on challenging institutional appeasement. On the 16th of October 2025, the Birmingham City Council Safety Advisory Group decided that fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv Football Club would not be allowed to attend its away match on the 6th of November 2025 against Aston Villa. This decision was based on a recommendation by West Midlands Police that was apparently made in order to appease those who had objected to the presence of Israelis in Birmingham. As many in our audience will know, West Midlands Police Chief Constable was forced to resign on the 16th of January 2026, and a retired Jewish Chief Superintendent has now been appointed by West Midlands Police to oversee anti-Semitism training. West Midlands Police are said to be addressing reports of anti-Semitism immediately and are working closely with representatives of the Birmingham Jewish community to promote harmony across the city. Other UK police forces are also said to be seeking advice now from West Midlands Police on how to avoid making similar errors to those which led to the decision to ban Tel Aviv Maccabi fans. We're delighted to be joined in this webinar by two individuals who played a major role in ensuring that West Midlands Police were held to account for their recommendation and that remedial steps would be taken. Simone, Schehtman and Michael Rowe will explain how these and other results have been achieved and what can and should be done to prevent appeasement of racial prejudice by other British institutions. Simone Schehtman is an entrepreneur and social activist and the founder of the hospitality and leisure group Teamworks. She also chaired the board of governors of King David School in Birmingham until 2024. Michael Rowe works in the reputation management department of a law firm based in London. He was previously a parliamentary assistant to former MP Nicola Richards, who chaired the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism, and Michael chairs the Young National Jewish Assembly. Together with a small group from the Birmingham Jewish community, they worked to hold the West Midlands Police to account in response to the Maccabi Tel Aviv fan ban, together with Nick Timothy MP, Lord Austin, Lord Mann, Dame Karen Bradley MP, and Joni Reid MP, as well as key journalists. They also worked for accountability over the West Midlands Police and the Birmingham City Council Safety Advisory Group, and they remain involved in resetting the relations between the Jewish community and the new leadership of the force. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your questions into the Q&A facility on Zoom for the discussion to follow. But first, Simone, Michael, you're both very welcome. Over to you to talk us through the inside track on these dramatic developments.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Delighted to be here and very grateful that UK Lawyers for Israel have invited Michael and myself to do this briefing. Really, really important to say at the outset that we'd like this to be a position where people feel empowered, perhaps really encouraged that not only each one of us nationally, locally, regionally can play a significant role, but together we are a formidable strength. And the more together we are, the more affecting positive change we can have, not just for our community, particularly in this context, but for the clear path for harmony for communities across the UK. So I'm delighted to start this chronology really with, let's go on to the 16th of October, because with the announcement by West Midlands Police and then that cascade, that domino effect from the Prime Minister to the Leader of the Opposition, Leader of the Liberal Democrats, the West Midlands Mayor, the Leader of Birmingham City Council, everyone came on stream and called out this decision that seemed at the face of it really disturbing. Everyone was calling out this. Got to feel like this is an anti-Semitic decision. It's got to feel wrong. This doesn't sit right. How could we have got to this point? What can be done? How can this be changed? So it was very interesting to have such a commonality across pretty much the entire political spectrum, both houses across the country, not just a regional or a local matter. And why was that? So I just want to track back for the audience to really understand a little bit. And I'm not going to go through each day because this is deeply extensive and has taken Michael and myself and our very small group of a handful of people several months of almost full-time work to enable the scrutiny, the accountability, integrity, and transparency, which has led to such substantial change and positive new direction, not just for police forcing, but to demonstrate what can be done. The 29th of August was the decision announcement of this match of Maccabi Tel Aviv meeting with Aston Villa, the mighty Aston Villa, one of the top teams in the country in the Europa League fixture. A few other things that may not be known, though, were within days, as had already been taking place over the summer, but very prominently within days, some very disturbing narratives immediately started hitting not just socials, but major media. And why was that? Because there was already a significant involvement from the Hind Rajab Foundation, whose co-founder is former Hezbollah terrorist, had reached from Los Angeles to Milan, London, across really whole of Europe, a campaign called Game Over Israel. And this was all about not just Maccabi, it was about banning Israel or Israeli teams, Israeli culture and sports from activities. The 28th of September was due to be an announcement by the head of the president of UEFA, Antonio Seferin, a discussion about whether Israel should or shouldn't be allowed to continue amongst UEFA matches. Strangely, though, or otherwise, on the 29th of September, President Trump announced his peace plan for Gaza. And of course, many people amongst UEFA knew on that 28th that decision wasn't going to quite happen because of the decision coming on the 29th. And indeed, that discussion on the 28th got bounced. The peace plan got kick-started. So what did the Game Over Israel campaign leads do? They focused everything into the next target audience. And that target audience was West Midlands and Birmingham, because Maccabi Tel Aviv were coming to play on the 6th of November. So that was the real flag in the sand activity that many people are not aware of. And tracking just slightly on from there, the 17th of September, you had the MP for Perry Bar, Ayub Khan, making very public statements around Aston Villa about not just, I want to be clear about this, not just banning hooligans, which I'm sure all of us around this webinar would agree have no place in any of our sporting fixtures, but about banning Israelis. That was the nub of this. By coincidence or otherwise, and being sensitive with language, because he has sadly and tragically passed away very young, but Councillor Wasim Zafar did an op-ed in the Birmingham Mail saying that everyone should boycott this match. Again, it wasn't because of the fans, it was because Israel has no right to participate in international sport. So those are really important dates that may have passed many of the audience by, and I want to make sure you're aware of. If we track forward then onto the dates around early October, there was a lot of movement. It turns out, as some people will now know, that one relatively junior West Midlands police officer met with three very senior Dutch police officers online, for which, as you now know from the HASC reporting, there was no agenda, no minutes, no recording, nothing, some contemporaneous notes that ended up getting shredded. But then a week later, on the 6th, 7th of October, you had that first SAG meeting. You had some interesting letters that went from West Midlands Police on the 8th and 9th over to the SAG. So really you had this conflation and speed of rather difficult narratives that were already primed that Israel wouldn't be welcome, the Israeli team wouldn't be welcome, that Maccabi and their fans should not participate and shouldn't be coming to the UK. And therefore, I think that's a very important part of setting the scene. And I want to just hand over to Michael now to have a little bit more, to put a bit more on what happened after that 16th of October date and the announcement.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to Natasha and to UKLFI for hosting us this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to everyone today. Just to follow on from what Simone was just saying there, I think it's worth just highlighting where our involvement started from, why our involvement was so important, and really what spurred us on to really get involved in this issue. So what happened was, we are both members of the Birmingham Jewish community, and were invited along with other members of the community to a meeting on the 20th of October last year, at which we were met with a panel of West Midlands police officers at that meeting. And we went in there blind. As Simone said, there wasn't much information available beforehand as to how this decision had been reached, or why it why this was the necessary action to take. This is just to be very clear, to ban all Israeli, and therefore basically Jews from the football match in our city. And what we were met with at that meeting was really uncomfortable listening. We were told by the officers, as we've heard plenty of times, which now debunked claims that the Maccabi fans were violent. They caused incidents in Amsterdam, which we're going to come on to discuss, that they were the problem. And basically, the only way to keep people safe was to ban the Jews. And this immediately smelt a bit fishy to us, but we thought, it's worth going along with and listening to what the officers have to tell us, and maybe they know more than we do. And obviously, we went in there with an open mind. Unfortunately, at that meeting, we were met with quite the opposite. We were met with what we later discovered to be completely false claims. Actually, evidence was in many cases fabricated. And we felt, as members of the community, that something had to be done to stand up to this, to say that, no, we cannot let a radical mob within our city dictate to us and dictate to Jews across the country how we should be treated by one of the UK's major police forces. So what we did, just to fast forward in the short space of time we have, is to highlight some of the activities that we undertook to enable us to achieve the results that collectively us as a Jewish community were able to achieve. So obviously, we were able to coordinate quite well with members of Parliament. That means members of the House of Commons and of the House of Lords. That meant that once we saw key individuals such as Nick Timothy, such as the Home Affairs Select Committee, such as Ian Austin and Lord Mann take on the role of being our voice in Parliament on this issue, we were able to show them what we had discovered, which is the chronology, which is the false claims of the police, which is the evidence fabrication. And that then led us to be able to really raise the profile of this issue. Let's remember that when this was banned, there were warm words from politicians, but there was no action until after our community meeting, until after this was then raised as a national issue. I think it's worth mentioning, whilst we're talking about the role of politicians, that the West Midlands Police Force, like many others within England, have police and crime commissioners who are, of course, directly elected individuals, political individuals, of course, directly elected to hold the police to account. So we have in the West Midlands, as many of you will have seen on the national news, a police and crime commissioner by the name of Simon Foster, who Simone and I both now know extremely well, and have met with on many occasions, just like others in the community have. And we really wanted to use all the avenues available to us to be able to highlight this decision and to change things around. So, we went through the Police and Crime Commissioner. Unfortunately, that was a dead end a lot of the time due to many political issues. As I said, we managed to locate and work very closely with these elected MPs and members of the House of Lords. And we were also able to work very effectively with local councillors. Now, often when people from outside of the city hear of Birmingham, they don't maybe have the rosiest view of the way that politics works in the city. And look, just like all other councils and elected bodies, there are, of course, councillors, as Simone has mentioned, and MPs within Birmingham who are certainly distasteful individuals and people who, unfortunately, encouraged West Midlands Police and the Safety Advisory Group to ban the Israeli flans. However, it's important to highlight that us in the community, we do have plenty of support. There are key councillors from all political parties on Birmingham City Council who we've worked closely with, who continue to engage with us on a regular basis, and who really saw that this was a disgraceful decision to take, and were happy to work with us to remedy the situation as best as possible. I'd just like to fast forward slightly, because all of you, I'm sure, will be aware of what happened. As Natasha mentioned, the chief constable eventually had to retire. He basically had to resign in disgrace after the Home Secretary said she no longer had confidence in him. We were both at the Home Affairs Select Committee meetings. We did a lot of work behind the scenes to feed into those meetings and to feed into the MPs on the Home Affairs Select Committee the exact granular detail of what went on and how this issue was really manipulated by West Midlands Police and others. But after that decision, after Craig Guilford had to resign, I think it's just important in our opening conversation just to mention that yes, things were very dark until that point. Yes, it was a terrible situation to be in when you have the police force in your city banning Jews because they didn't want to face up to the Muslims in the local area, many of whom were acting and siding with radical Islamists. But yes, that was, of course, the truth, and that was the facts. But after that position, we were able to flip things, and we are now working along with others in the community very closely with the acting Chief Constable Scott Green, who I think we would both say is doing a very good job at engaging with the Jewish community. There have been real reforms put into place at a meeting we held with the acting chief constable. For example, I suggested that it would really improve the view of our community and it would be a good step to rebuilding trust with our community if the police were to implement specific anti-Semitism training for all officers. And I'm glad to say that decision was taken by Scott Green. I've been working with the force to implement that along with others, and I'm really pleased that that's going to be happening. There has been now a lot of work to reset the relationship. So if we think in the space of 3 or 4 months, well, 4 or 5 months, if we think we went from the 20th of October, when Jews were taken, the Jewish community were rushed into the police headquarters in the West Midlands to be told that a decision had already been taken to ban Israelis from the match. If you fast forward just a few months, you will see that now we're in a situation where officers in the force are now regularly engaging with the community, and that's quite a transformation. To think that the West Midlands Police engaged with 8 Muslim groups, 2 of whom at least were known to be extremists. One had an ISIS flag, one had government funding removed over extremism. That was in just before October time. You fast forward to February and March of this year, and you have the police force working very collaboratively with us to implement anti-Semitism training, to issue a statement just a couple of weeks ago saying how the hate marches, the slogans at hate marches will be policed in the same way that the Met Police and Greater Manchester Police treat those anti-Semitic slogans and that anti-Semitic rhetoric. So if you fast forward that in that short period of time, we've been able to transform things within the city, which is not only good for the local Jews, it's good for all communities in the West Midlands and the Jewish community nationally, because it shows, and this is something that I'm really keen to get over today, it shows that the Jewish community won't be taken for granted. We will not be taken for a ride. We will not allow the police to sideline our opinions to make their lives easier. In fact, the opposite will be the case. As we've seen, this will become, we managed to, with others, make this into a national media story over an extended period of time. We managed to work with politicians, with media individuals, with other sympathetic officers to enable us to achieve the results we have. And I think it's important to say on this webinar that people should understand that we have to use our voice and our standing in the community as much as we can. That this doesn't take someone with massive connections or a team behind them. It's up to everyone to say that we will stand up against anti-Semitism, we will stand up against our community being sidelined, and we will use our voice and the powers we have just as an individual to make things better for our community. And I'm glad to say that the two of us with others have been able to implement positive change. So we're very happy to take any questions that anyone has on that.
Thank you both very much indeed. There are some questions that have been coming in, and I do very much want to, over the course of this discussion, use this case study, your experience of having argued and fought this case successfully, also to draw upon for our audience purposes and for those that are keen to potentially do more in holding other institutions to account. So your hands-on experience will be very useful for that. One of the first questions that came through was to ask the view of the panellists on the remarkable silence of the Home Secretary, a local Birmingham MP for one of the inner city constituencies, until she finally declared no confidence in the Chief Constable. Can either of you speak to the sort of evolution that we saw in that position and what the earlier position of the Home Secretary was on this and your thoughts in particular on that?
Yes, I can take that, Natasha. So I think it's a little bit vague actually as to what the call on the 8th of October was from the Chief Constables who were meeting with Shabana Mahmood, the Ladywood MP, quite rightly is local MP, but of course is also the Secretary of State for the Home Office. So that conversation was about general Chief Constable matters across the UK. All of them apparently are present in that meeting. But one of her statements was what's on the horizon, and he raised trouble or potential challenges and troubles around this game. We understand wording around things like I need to be kept posted as to the options was how that conversation panned out. Now, I think we would, on hindsight, have liked an answer to be slightly more robust, something that could have looked like, please keep me posted. But obviously, if one of your options is to ban the Maccabi fans, the Israelis, the Jews, from coming to this match, that is not an option. So at that point, we understand 4 options were raised, and that was one of them. One of the questions that remains outstanding, rather, is at what point or why wasn't that one of the 4 an absolute no-go? Now, if it was just a loose, we don't have all the documentation or recording of that meeting with all the Chief Constables and the Secretary of State. If it was a loose conversation, these are 4 options. One of them includes this. And she said, keep me posted. I don't think that is quite as significant a commentary as, okay, well, that one of those 4 is still okay to go with. Because ultimately, when it did come closer to the date on the 16th of October, and the announcement was made, there was still opportunity to try and change things. But by that point, everything had escalated to such a degree that it was felt to be too late. I don't think it was, but by the 20th, of course, in the meeting that we were having with West Midlands Police, in that very evening, I think it was about 8:30, we started, I think, 7 o'clock, and I think 8:30 or so, Maccabi withdrew their ticket allocation. And then it becomes much more complicated with respect, and we don't have time to go through the granular details, but that starts to involve UEFA and ticketing and is procedurally apparently very complex in terms of footballing rules and regulations. And a Secretary of State, whilst, obviously has considerable powers, does not have the ability to just flick a switch and say to UEFA, no, we're now going to reallocate all those tickets to, Jewish fans in Britain or elsewhere. So I think it's a bit grey, but unfortunately we were sitting in a position where we would have liked the whole chapter, Natasha and audience here, shows quite a challenging position of a lack of precision amongst many organisations, and to be fair, that includes within the Home Office. You heard in that first HASC the policing minister, who had only just taken the role, and I think Richard Clarke, saying that they had some reports but not comprehensive input. And that kind of slippage between individuals and people, I'm afraid, and not pointing any fingers, does enable such, can I use the word, calamities to take place. And I would call this a calamity, a scandal, a fiasco, whichever one of those 3 you want to take. Again, that 1st of October meeting between a relatively not junior, but relatively, he certainly wasn't right at the top of West Midlands Police. One person with 3 Dutch officials, again, no agenda, no minutes, no recording, no precision. And then you had a whole sequence, which are extremely public, of the West Ham game that never existed, no calls into the Met, if it had existed, West Midlands Police could have called them it. Didn't happen. The West Midlands Police calling into the Israeli officials to check on the nature of the level of ultras of those fans. Were they, weren't they? There were so many gaps, so many things that just didn't happen. And I think we have to be honest, and Michael will concur, and our small team that had, as I say, a forensic insight of pretty much everything, we can say categorically this sloppiness, this ineptitude, inexactitude that continued for several months, and then in Parliament in a very public discourse, with the Assistant Chief Constable O'Hara, who spoke with us extensively, saying, well, the Jewish community in Birmingham we had discussion, upheld the decision. Absolutely no such thing took place. And we were locally horrified, but I think nationally horrified as well, that it's this sloppiness. And we have shown now what we can do differently with precision. And that's really, I think, what Michael and I and our small team have demonstrated, that the precision is what we need to do to take forward to make sure these things can't happen again, not just with the police force, but in other public sectors and other institutions.
Simone, I note your use of the word sloppiness,
Yes.
and it may be considered, certainly from some of the questions that are streaming in from the audience, that's a very diplomatic way of potentially looking at what has transpired here. What one questioner asks or states, I find it remarkable that the Chief Constable was not charged with misconduct in public office. He says, given that he admitted to having fabricated evidence to support the decision to ban the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. Of course, that is the way that certainly it's come across to certain parts of the public. And then the questioner asks, is there nothing that can be done to ensure that such actions do face consequences? So do you think that in some respects the conduct here, perhaps of the Chief Constable and others involved, perhaps went beyond sloppiness? And if so, do you see any real cause for these sorts of calls for misconduct in public office to be considered, or indeed more account to have been given to the conduct of the officials in question here?
Yes, very good question and quite straightforward to answer. So to be clear, the force and certainly the former Chief Constable has already been referred to the Independent Office of Police Conduct. And in fact, on the first day of his new role, the acting Chief Constable, Scott Green, did a voluntary referral of the force to the IOPC. That then can take into account, as you described, misconduct, conduct in office, all of those kinds of things. So to be clear, this is far from over. It's far from over for him as the former Chief Constable, but it's also far from over in drilling down lower down within the institution of West Midlands Police. That is now, there's a second report from Sir Andy Cook, the inspector, and there is also the full reporting from the director of the IOPC. So that is due in the summer. So I can't say any more on that, but there is much more to go on this, and we should expect some more news on that. The word sloppiness I use because I strongly feel there was a lot of sloppiness, but I do not believe, and others can have their own view, but and again, Michael's with me on the call, we did have exceptionally close insight on everything. I should also just flag up at this point that there's almost no line within the 58-page report, official report by the Dutch Justice Ministry of June 2025, the 40-page independent, very robust chronology of the Dutch second report of June 2025 that we do not know. And I raise that because whilst there were significant differences between what West Midlands Police were telling us and what is in those reports, in particular with view to and there was bad behaviour in Amsterdam in November 2024 by Maccabi fans. Let's not dispute that. It just wasn't as militaristic and terrible as we were being described to and painted. But the important point is, was there malice? Was there deliberate intention? And was there overt and deliberate anti-Semitism by West Midlands Police? My strongly held view on that is no. But there was a lot of things that concocted together and were so badly mangled that this is a very dangerous position not just in terms of hate crimes and anti-Semitism and this space, but we have to go to our police for safety, security, trust, integrity, reasonableness. We have to know that they police without fear or favour, and it has to be policing by consent. We were left in a position with, we really don't, we want to be very careful because we still need the police. And that's one of the key things that Michael has raised, that I've been so impressed that from the changeover, the third week of January, the acting chief constable did say this has been a watershed moment for policing in the country. You've effected incredible change, but judge me by my actions, but not by my words. And that's what we need to go on. And that's the robust position that we take forward from all of this work. And it has been a huge effort, but change is what we were looking for. And that's very well received. So the sloppiness and ineptitude is definitely there. I really want people to go away with the fact that the words malice are dangerous. And I don't think that we were in that space. So we have to take some positive there, that it wasn't such a negative, deliberate intention of attack against our community.
Okay, I think those are important points. Of course, one of the really troubling aspects of how the evidence from Amsterdam was misrepresented is that one saw the victims being blamed of the very things that had happened to them. For example, Maccabi Tel Aviv fans being accused of throwing passers-by into canals and otherwise sort of hunting them down, which is, of course, we now know exactly what was done to the Israeli fans that attended Amsterdam for that match. But drawing on perhaps communal relations, Michael, there are a number of questions that go to this. Perhaps the first of these is how are the local Muslim groups in Birmingham responding to this change? Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, of course. And it's a very good point. And I think it's worth highlighting, and as I tried to do previously, which is that there are extremists, unfortunately, in the Muslim community in Birmingham, just like there probably are, unfortunately, across the world at the moment. That does not mean that the majority of Muslims in Birmingham or in any other city supported this decision or anything else. And I think it's actually worth saying that there are many very good relationships between the local Jewish community and local Muslim community, whether that's interpersonal or that's intercommunal. And I think that's a great strength. That should not exclude the fact that, unfortunately, extremists and their voices are often more predominant and able to exercise themselves in ways that mean that their views get more limelight and are taken into consideration more than your average person who just wants to get on with their daily life and doesn't really care who's going to watch a football match one evening. So yes, relationships are sometimes strained, but that's the case in lots of different places. But relationships are also very much about building a working way in which we can get over hurdles like this. And I've had many messages from not just Muslims in Birmingham, but people of all faiths and none, who are saying how both outraged they are at the decision and how grateful they are to the local Jewish community for standing up for themselves and enabling this change to take place. Because policing is about having trust in the police force. And if the local Jewish community don't have trust in the police force, then it means that other communities also don't have trust in their ability to police without fear or favour. And I think also it's worth highlighting that your average police officer in the West Midlands is extremely good and has given great support to Jewish institutions, as they have to lots of different institutions across the city. But there were extremists, and I concur with what Simone was just saying, that I don't think these extremists were malicious in the police force. I don't think, as much as I disagree with most of the actions of Craig Guilford in this whole episode, I don't think what he did was out of malice. I would say the same about Simon Foster, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and other senior officers. I deeply disagree with many of the decisions that they've taken, but I don't think it was anti-Semitic, and I don't think it was malicious. I do think, however, that those also involved in the decision, so those on the SAG, which, just to give us a slight background, that the Safety Advisory Group formally made the decision to ban the away fans. They were advised by West Midlands Police. So West Midlands Police, just like all police forces, is operationally independent. The SAG was made up of political individuals well. So there were councillors on the SAG. One of the changes after this decision is that it's very unlikely now that there will ever be councillors on safety advisory groups again. At the time, there were extremist councillors on the SAG, on the safety advisory group, and there were extremist individuals in Birmingham who had leverage within that committee and within individuals on that committee, and they managed very effectively, from their point of view, to use their leverage, to use their powers to encourage the SAG to ban the away fans, to ban the Israeli fans. Now, so I do think they were extremists and people with malicious intent on the SAG. That doesn't mean, I don't think they were within West Midlands Police. I just think that, unfortunately, they were going down the wrong path. They had obviously been misinformed, as we've highlighted, and we can do so at much more detail, but now's probably not the time for that. But there was a lot of misinformation they had at the time. There was a lot which was unfortunately twisted and fabricated. But to go back to the original question, do most people in Birmingham and in the city would they have supported this decision? I think the clear answer to that is no. That going about your life in Birmingham, in the UK's second city, is mostly very peaceful. I think it's the extremists that us collectively, as not just a Jewish community, but as individuals who oppose extremism in all forms and in all walks of life, this is what we need to really target, and that's what we've been working to do.
Entirely understand that the distinctions you're properly drawing between, the police and the other extremists who might have certainly influenced how this decision was taken. A number of questions are getting to some of the influences on the police force and asking about the potential fear amongst the police when dealing with these, perhaps I can characterise them as interest groups against Israel, and some of the extremists that you've been referring to. To what extent, perhaps Michael, staying with you for a moment, to what extent do you think that might have been a factor, or have you seen evidence of that being a factor in the decisions taken with respect to Birmingham?
Yeah, I do think that is a factor, and certainly was a factor in terms of the individuals we're talking about. So not only Ayub Khan, not only Wasim Zafar, but others, and these are both councillors, one of whom is an MP. Definitely are encouraged and often elected and funded by individuals who are extremist. Now, that doesn't mean that the majority of their constituents are. It does mean that they have a significant, as you say, interest group who they need to please and who they agree with, and who do not pay due regard to local Jewish communities, or for that matter, local individuals who just want to get on with their life and carry on in a normal way. It does mean that they therefore are acting in a way which is completely contrary to the freedom-loving world. And we've seen this more broadly in politics. Unfortunately, in recent years, has become very sectarian, and we now have elections and election campaigns being fought not only in Birmingham but across the country on basically international issues that are taking place in the Middle East that have nothing to do with the elections here. And this is becoming an increasing problem for our politics, and it means that us as individuals, even though we feel that this is way beyond us, what happens in Westminster is beyond us, or what happens on our local council is too far removed for us to be able to affect. I think what we've shown is that whilst yes, it's very difficult to convince these people to change their mind and to suddenly become Zionists, I don't think that's really possible for any of us, or it might be a dream, but I don't think it's possible. But what I do think is possible is for us to show that we will not be sidelined, and that they cannot just go about their daily activities in this malicious way. So there's definitely a distinction to be drawn. I also want to highlight that even in places that unfortunately in Birmingham have been reported as, I quote, no-go zones, and in places that are seen by many people outside of the city as being places where sort of radicals are able to fester and other things like that. I would say, unfortunately, there are pockets of radicalization within Birmingham and within the UK. I mean, you can find this in probably every major city, unfortunately, and that's a deeper systematic problem which does need to be tackled. But that's not to say that these places are are no-go zones or as bad as they're often reported. It means that there are extremists who are able to get onto the airwaves and are able to get their position and their voice out in an effective way. But that doesn't mean that they represent the majority of people there. And what it takes is for us to stand up against them and to say, we have to use our voice, we have to be counted, and we have to be seen. And that's what we've tried to do.
And in fact, one of the questions to this point of the type of activity that you've been addressing asks if there is action being taken to prescribe Islamist groups operating perhaps through limited companies or charitable organisations, whether any action would be taken against any of the groups involved in this decision-making process. Simone, I don't know. I know UKLFI is very involved in looking at this, especially at organisations that have charitable status. I don't know if you're aware of any, but if you are, we'd love to hear about them in the context of this webinar. And if I may couple that with perhaps a more positive question, which has been asked as to whether you've established any Muslim allies through this campaign. In fact, one member of the audience seems to have answered that to an extent by saying there are some Muslims here in Birmingham who've aligned themselves with the community, and we've re-established a Muslim-Jewish dialogue group, which had unfortunately ceased after the 7th of October. So that seems to have been re-established. But do you have any insight either into the positive or the negative aspects of these questions as they pertain to organisations involved in and around the Birmingham area?
Well, certainly you saw Lord Wolney's report, extensive report launched in just, I think, Wednesday last week, very extensive, and flagging and highlighting really very disturbing situation coming through from the Charities Commission with how many charities have been set up with a kind of faux focus that really have got no positive intent, but to start seeping through this malign discourse against our faith, against Israel, against Zionists, whichever of those three, you want to start, really has been, it's very, very deep. And I think that, 109 pages is definitely worth a read. We have had the anti-Zionist movement attempted to launch here, of course, just weeks 2-3 weeks after the early forced retirement of the former Chief Constable on the 8th of February, which again, Michael and myself and a few others locally worked very, very hard with the new team at West Midlands Police and made it as, I mean, it's revolting in its concept, right? It was talking about pro-armed resistance and the eradication of Zionists. I mean, really, the language is deeply abhorrent and we believe, illegal to be essentially inciting violence and calling for violence against any people, in this case against Jews. But again, we worked very hard and mitigated that from what would have been a bigger Jew fest, dare I use those phrases, into something that was rather a damp squib, still 30 people, 2 arrests, including one lady, well known in London, of course, stepped down from her position as in the NHS, suspended. And the other one is a press spokesperson for Iranian press TV. I mean, you really couldn't make it up. This is absolutely in our face, all of us across the country. That's why it's critical. We roll our sleeves up and we work very hard to get results and to get these things addressed. In the context of local support, there have been really substantial numbers of individual Muslims and also some of the very moderate faith settings who've reached out to us and said that the decision was wrong, the structure was wrong, how it was handled was wrong, the narratives being put out are vile, and that gives us comfort. The extremist side is a small faction, and we should know that it's there. People of faith have their faith in a very positive way. This is a malignant and pernicious extremism, and we have to be calling that out, not as part of Islam, but a part of something that has become deeply unhinged and pervaded British society. Now, clearly, it's not a recent thing. It has been building. It's been building pre the 7th of October. And I think it has really escalated these last couple of years, emboldened by those mass demonstrations across all of our cities with the cheering and the flag waving. And the previous government, the current government not being able, for whatever reasons, to really clamp down freedom of speech is one thing. But a freedom of speech, there's no 100% freedom of speech, as we all know, and calling out death too. These things have stepped over lines, and I have to say, I'm tremendously pleased and proud that this red line that was definitely stepped over on the 16th of October decision, whilst it still took place, has been put in such a prominence now nationally that it will not happen again. And that is a very, very important thing that we took forward, that we should all take something positive from.
So there are
If I could just add,
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
just add very quickly, which is that this was not just an issue which has affected the local Jewish community. I mean, just by way of an example, I had just last week an individual, quite a senior individual within the Sikh community, contact me and say, we've seen your work, and he was faced with an issue of racism himself, and is looking to replicate some of the things that we have done. And that's not an exclusive example, because there's been many such people from all sorts of faith groups and other groups who have contacted us to say that these issues are affecting them. It's not just about Jews and Israelis. It's about making the police force and other public bodies, because this work unfortunately doesn't just stop with the police. Unfortunately, we face anti-Semitism across a range of public bodies and other institutions. It's about saying it doesn't just affect the Jews. If there are issues affecting us, there's a very high likelihood that they're affecting other communities as well. And so this work is in everyone's interests.
A couple of things to pick up perhaps from your answers that link to questions from the audience. The first is to ask, well, they say very interesting talk, so credit to the two of you. Could you please comment on the importance of using the media as opposed to working behind the scenes? Simone, a great deal of what you were just talking about really did focus on the public attention to this case, and of course the media coverage was critical.
Absolutely. Really good question. Thank you for asking. So two things I want to raise here. Firstly, this subject for me really blew up in the British interest because it was football. Football is part of the British psyche, part of our weekly agenda, Wednesday nights. I know it's Shabbat, but much of the country on a Saturday and often now on a Sunday. And in fact, the whole Premiership cycle and the Championship cycle also happen on other days. So there are, I wouldn't just say hundreds of thousands, it could be as many as millions of people, everyday Radio 4, whatever the major war incidents going on in the world, we still track back to what happened with Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United, Tottenham, etc., Aston Villa, etc., etc. So it hit a nerve, but hitting a nerve isn't enough. The point really is the LGBTQ community, Sikhs, Hindus, people of minority ethnicity, Roma, this country is fabulous because of its rich diversity. We have had people coming in from building their lives, establishing themselves for generations from across the globe. And that's surely one of the greatest things about Great Britain. When you start to see a dictatorial and a pattern appearing where it's all about one perspective against anyone else, things start to actually escalate and crumble quite quickly. And that was really what was happening. West Midlands Police took the path of least resistance. They took on board the narrative. It is so easy now, as we all know from AI, those of us who are attuned to what's going on online, you can dress anything up and mangle it within seconds. So a piece that used to be long form, 30 minutes, 45 minutes or 2 hours, now in 6 seconds on TikTok or Snapchat or whatever it is, can be mangled, can be distorted. And it's meta. I don't mean meta as in former Facebook. Meta, by that I mean it eats itself. It rebuilds and it rebuilds on top of itself. So what was an origination has become so distorted as to not be able to know what originally happened. As, for example, on the 6th and the 7th of November in Amsterdam, I also would like to raise a point that many people may not be aware, that the 6th was Kristallnacht in Amsterdam. And another reason why there was a very serious police presence was, and as Michael has mentioned, a sad irony, They were there to protect the Jewish people in Amsterdam who were there commemorating a very important part of our annual calendar of, commemoration of the horrors of our history. And yet West Midlands Police threw in, with a 5,000 police having to support because of the hysterical and the dangerous and the militaristic Maccabi fans. All of this narrative through the Game Over Israel campaign, it all got very mangled. The media were key in the critical role of disseminating and making transparent the key points that had got mangled. So lots of people got thrown in the river, never happened. It was a really critical point. That there was a mass rampage against Dutch police officers by the Maccabi fans, never happened, was a very key point. One of the most disturbing comments on a personal level, and I'm sure you'll listeners and yourself will echo this, citing that these fans were impressive. I've got a note because I sat at that meeting on the 20th of October. Impressively sophisticated, highly militaristically trained individuals. Well, take stock. Any well-structured person over 18 in Israel has conscription, has the miluim. So they are doing, part of the IDF, whether that's reservists, whether that's in the catering, whether that's packing parachutes, or whether that's front line. It's a big mixture. They really got this very, very wrong. And the media were critical, key and critical. So not just the Jewish Chronicle, I must say, but from the Independent, BBC, the Telegraph, of course, the Times the Times repeatedly made some very, very granular interventions that were hugely relevant, and this all almost died in late November. But we had to keep the key points of error being surfaced into Parliament such that things could continue. As you saw, more questions were asked from the HASC. The 1st of December, we then got all kinds of strange reports and then some apologies coming through in the beginning of January. You heard the 6th of January HASC, and then the rest is history, as they say. But yes, absolutely, the key media were a glue to keep this coming out. But I would say at some level, the football was the nerve of this. If this had been, I don't know, a carpentry display, I think perhaps it wouldn't have been so significant. But football is such a key component to our, our weekly, our national psyche. So, but absolutely, the media were critical.
Yeah, did you have any interactions with the Football Association or UEFA? One of the questioners asks whether either of you did, and if so, whether they were helpful or unhelpful in this process.
Michael? I can take it.
It's an interesting question. Basically, directly, we didn't. West Midlands Police did on our behalf in a way. So they took, for example, after the 20th of October meeting we had with the police force, they took a suggestion that people in that meeting raised, which was the suggestion was that, okay, you're going to ban Israeli fans coming from abroad. We think that's the wrong decision, but we are where we are now. So in terms of getting that match as good as possible, can we have local individuals from the UK who support Maccabi Tel Aviv coming to the stands on that day? So West Midlands Police did take that suggestion back to UEFA, so we understand it. It turned out afterwards that just due to timelines and things like that, it wasn't possible for that suggestion to be materialized in this instance, which was a great shame, and also led to the fury around this decision. So we didn't have any direct dealings with them because, and I think it's worth saying, they were not fundamental to the banning of the fans. They are bodies that work within the football structure. But the final decision came down to the Safety Advisory Group on Birmingham City Council, advised by West Midlands Police. So as I say, there's only so many people that we can interact with, and this was a multifaceted effort. As I say, we're speaking from media to politicians, to officials, to others within the police, to community members, all across the spectrum. It didn't really come down that in the end, UEFA or other bodies would have direct impact on this. I wouldn't say they were, I think they were sort of equally either way. I wouldn't say they encouraged the decision, and I wouldn't say they deeply opposed it. I think it just was sort of out of their remit. But hopefully, if this were to be proposed again in the future, they'd be able to advise clubs to at least ask the local authorities to look at this again, given the backlash that took place this time.
And speaking of politicians, a few of the audience reference the absolutely great Nick Timothy MP, who consistently played such a leading role in highlighting these issues in Parliament and also, I believe, in the media. So straddling both of those arenas. But may I just ask, perhaps finally on this case, and I know we spent so long on it before we sort of zoom out to institutions more broadly. But in relation to Simone's comments about the general public sentiment, the mood, the attitude shifting so substantially against Israel, driven, of course, by these repeated hate marches, by the media coverage. One of the questioners did ask about the attitude of the rank and file police in the autumn and whether that is different now. I don't know to what extent either of you have had engagement with more ordinary members of the police force, but if so, have you had any impression as to their attitudes and any changes in them?
Well, my experiences pre and post have been similar, that every contact point I've had with, it doesn't sound particularly polite, but technically called rank and file officers, has been always extremely positive, completely disconnected to any agenda, any prioritization, any preferences, just doing a really super job at the coalface, protecting our schools, our school, our, students. We've got a massive huge student population at the University of Birmingham and across various campuses, really very, very positive. And I have to say, since I certainly have had some more intimate discussions with rank and file, and I do feel that a number of them have expressed embarrassment, but a continual wish to be really closely connected. For example, the horrible issues in Rotterdam the other day and Michigan. I'm getting regular messages now from inspectors who are more on the ground to say, we're thinking of you, we're upping the patrols. I think it's very positive. But again, this could only have happened if you acknowledge that red line. We sat at that meeting, which was deeply humiliating, on the 20th of October. We had another one, by the way, on the 24th of October, which Michael didn't quite mention. That was the same day in the evening as the first urgent question by Nick Timothy that we discussed in Parliament. And we had to say this red line, if this is the red line, we are nationally, not just regionally and locally, but nationally, in real trouble, because that will be used as a precedent. It will be used as a precedent for, we've got the Invictus Games happening next year across the West Midlands. That is actually IDF veterans coming into the country to be part of a really important games. There's already going to be some challenges around that. And had you already set that precedent, you would have had an impossible time to say that they're going to be coming, but also on other things, business. I've heard a whole number of people, for example, in the comedy and a literary scene being cancelled. We've got a cancel Israel, cancel Jew, cancel Zionist culture going on, and we absolutely mustn't let that prevail. So all of these incremental workings, there's some fabulous, not just MPs, but also in the House of Lords, orators who absolutely call this out and know that it's wrong. And we have to work very, very diligently with them and with organisations to collaborate across the country to make sure that we speak with a unified voice, that we are no more special, but we have every right to be. And we must be able to continue our faith and our practices across the country.
So on this very point, I'm going to take the liberty of running a little bit over our time, because there are a number of questions that I would like to read out to you, and perhaps we can deal with them collectively on the other instances that really do require a fight back. The first question says, sadly, similar scenarios to this are very likely to happen again in the current climate, where the mantra of not inflaming community tensions gains increasing credence amongst public bodies. So we're talking about public bodies more broadly, not just the police here. Is it possible, given your experience, to set out an action plan with clear steps we can take in the future? hang on to that one, because there are a couple of others that I think are worthy of reading out to you. One individual writes, "I've repeatedly reported serious anti-Semitism to organisations like the BBC. The BBC has come up consistently in questions that we're not going to be able to get onto. The police and local authorities, but have consistently faced denial and inaction, even after exhausting complaints processes. This includes misleading responses, and I'm not alone in experiencing this widespread refusal to acknowledge anti-Jewish hatred across the UK. What systemic changes are needed to address this deliberate blindness?" And the final question to throw into the mix: what can a non-lawyer do when they reach the end of the line with a complaint to a public body? This question has given a bit of background, saying, apart from my experiences with IPSO, so that's the Independent Press Standards Organisation, the questioner says she's also sent complaints to the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner over a recent tweet by an individual I'm sure you'll know well, who said they love killing kids. She says her past experience with the Standards Commissioner is that they won't even bother to investigate complaints. And in relation to bodies dismissing every complaint at the first hurdle, she recounts her experience with local councils, the General Medical Council, the Solicitors Regulator, and more. So her question is there any point in complaining? Perhaps you can take those three as we run a little over, and give your thoughts for the purpose of complaining, the purpose of keeping that pressure up, what specifically non-lawyers, I appreciate, like yourself, Simone, are able to do, and what clear steps we might be able to execute with an action plan in the future.
Shall I take that, Michael? Yeah.
I'd love to hear from both of you, but of course, go ahead, Simone.
I'll start. So there's a lot in that, and the issue is the word complaint is absolutely right, but as a standalone, it really goes nowhere. So had we complained about what happened, what was announced on the 16th of October, that would also have gone nowhere. What this needs is, firstly, the organisations across the country representing our community to have a real hard look and deep dive at the collaboration and the tightness of the way we handle the same thing that keeps popping up. So the individual who's raised that to you on the group is not unique to that individual, either the BBC or the council. This is happening everywhere, in healthcare, in educational settings. It's happening everywhere. But what appears to happen is we are not getting forensic enough with how we rebut it. And I can't explain to you here and now how we do that, because it has obviously been a very extensive process that Michael and I and several colleagues have had to follow through, with a huge amount of material. But just to say it in a nutshell, it isn't one email, and it isn't a follow-up email of the first email. It takes an enormous amount of energy to keep chasing down, and when somebody says, the computer says no, you have to keep going back, and then you have to up it and up it and up it and up it. So whether that is then not just going to your MP, in our case, certain parts of the country, you might have an MP who would be deaf to this, so you have to find somebody else who might be. It might be in the HASC, it might be in the culture committee that holds the culture secretary to account, or ministers to account. It may be through specific niche media channels, but you have to try everything simultaneously. It's a lot of work, and it just can't be done in piecemeal. And I'm afraid in there lies the problem, because I'm an individual. I run a business, and I've got my hands full all the time. Michael, is developing all his skills in the legal profession. He has cases, and it's very difficult to find the capacity. But it is not good enough to say, I feel like I complained. I sent an email. I got nothing back. That's the issue now. We need to work out collectively, because the same themes keep appearing. So we need to collectively work out how we challenge this with parliamentarians in a cohesive and very directed manner, because it is only going to escalate, and this onslaught is only getting worse. And I don't want to sound negative, but divided we fall. We must be cohesive on this.
I couldn't agree more. It's prompting me to ask one final question from the audience, which is whether anyone in the community is either responsible for or taking on doing this work at a granular level across all the public sectors, given the number of problematic characters that seem to be embedded everywhere these days, and is there funding for this in the community? And the one entity that we perhaps have yet to mention, of course, that is very involved across all of these areas is UK Lawyers for Israel, which deals with these sorts of matters on a granular level, wherever legal issues are involved and where legal skills can contribute. Although, of course, the lawyers and volunteers at UK Lawyers for Israel can't possibly deal with absolutely everything, but the workload has increased dramatically, and with now a team of 6 very competent staff lawyers and numerous volunteers, the organisation is taking on more work than ever, and it's across all of these institutions: the media, public authorities, sporting federations, and indeed Jonathan Turner did raise the discrimination against Maccabi Tel Aviv fans at the first juncture as this ban became public. And what I would say in terms of the funding is that the organisation is funded by generous donors, but in order to meet this demand, would always welcome further donations and support for that work. And I know that there's been wonderful coordination, cooperation with the two of you, specifically on this and other matters. So I hope that gives a degree of perhaps roadmap and precedent for how the efforts of UK Lawyers for Israel, and indeed of yourselves on this, can be expanded and drawn upon. I don't know if there are any final remarks you would like to conclude with, Michael?
Yes, well, just to say, first of all, I fully concur with everything you've just said, and I put on record again my and our thanks to UK Lawyers for Israel, to yourself, to Jonathan Turner and the whole team for everything they've done, not only putting on today's webinar, but also for supporting our efforts throughout, and encourage, obviously, anyone who's able to donate to the fantastic cause that is UKLFI. But also, I would say that there is going to be increased granular work necessary. That requires further resources along the way. Me and Simone and others are not planning to go away anytime soon. As you say, there's plenty more work to be done, and we intend to do it as much as possible with the support of others. And I would also say that every one of you and everyone who later watches this can play their part. You don't have to. It does take a lot of work, but you don't have to be all in or all out. I think it's important to say that yes. Writing to your MP is important, but also you can do more than that. You can really push this within your local councillors, within your local police and crime commissioners, whether it's writing to regulatory bodies, as Simone excellently said. It's not just one email and a follow-up. It needs to be showing that you mean business, and showing that you will use the variety of tools that is at all of our hands to really tackle any issues that come up, because our voice as Jews, as supporters of Israel, as any individual citizens, is just as important as the voices of extremists and of haters. And I think that what we hopefully have shown is that anyone can do that. It takes perseverance, and it does take work, but it's not, these people are not out of your reach. We live in a very technological age. Everyone is reachable in certain ways. There are lots of bodies who are there to facilitate contact between individuals and authorities, and I'd say use those things at your disposal. I'm happy to speak to others on an individual basis if there's concerns that we can help with, if we haven't covered how to do that today. But I think that it's about saying that really we've shown, hopefully, from this, that the opportunity now is to say, unfortunately, we're living in times which are often not easy to deal with. A lot of the narratives we see, a lot of the decisions we see being taken are unfortunately very deeply troubling. But we must use that to our advantage. We must show that from October, with the disgraceful meeting that West Midlands Police had with the community, if you fast forward just a few months, we're now in regular contact. We have anti-Semitism training being rolled out to West Midlands Police officers. We have helpful statements. We have daily contact with officers, and that change is possible. And I'd encourage everyone on the call and to support the work of UKLFI and others to enable that to really happen and for meaningful change to take place.
Well, thank you very much indeed to you both, not just for taking the time today, but for your unrelenting efforts and for setting such a positive example and precedent. Of course, the work is ever increasing, but it is a pleasure to do it in such positive company. So I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.